I was talking to an elderly history professor in Beijing recently who keeps a faded black and white photograph of the Canadian doctor Norma Bethune on his desk. He spoke with a quiet, almost reverent nostalgia about the era when internationalism meant a lone foreigner risking his life to perform surgeries in a dusty cave. That was the pure heart of it, he told me, his eyes fixed on the image, a gift given when we had nothing. To him, that was the ultimate definition of global solidarity, a selfless sacrifice in China's darkest hour. But then the conversation shifted. I mentioned a recent news report about a massive high-tech port being inaugurated in East Africa, a project financed and built entirely by Chinese firms. I asked him if he saw Bethune's spirit in those miles of steel and concrete. His expression changed instantly. The warmth vanished, replaced by a sharp defensive edge. He didn't see a continuation, he saw a confusing contradiction. He started talking about global public goods and the responsibility of a great power, his tone turning clinical. That's about development, he said firmly, not just a simple gift. It was a striking moment, that instantaneous tension between the memory of being helped and the reality of being the one who helps. It left me wondering, how did the spirit of internationalism transform from a desperate, blood-stained scalpel in a mountain cave into a multi-billion-dollar global infrastructure network? Is what we're seeing today a genuine evolution of that early gratitude, or is it something else entirely, a new form of dominance dressed in the language of cooperation? To understand the friction between China and the West today, we have to look at how a nation that once survived on the light of others has decided to build its own power grid for the rest of the world.
That anecdote it's just so perfect because it captures the exact transformation we're here to unpack. And for you, the listener, welcome. You're joining us for a really critical deep dive.
It really gets to the heart of the confusion, doesn't it? The scalpel versus the power grid.
It does. And our sources, they really challenge us to see this not as a contradiction, but as a systematic response to global needs, one that's rooted very deeply in China's own history.
Okay, so that's our mission for today then, to really examine how that historical experience, being both the one getting help and the one giving it, how that shaped the model of engagement we see now.
Exactly. We're moving beyond the simple idea of traditional sort of transactional aid. We need to look at a much more sophisticated, interconnected system.
A system built around two core pillars, as I understand it.
Two pillars. First, there's the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI, that's the engine. And second, the philosophical framework, the blueprint, which is the Global Community of Shared Future, or GCSF.
Okay, let's start right there with that shift in philosophy. Because you're right, it is the difference between emergency relief, the scalpel in the cave, and something more permanent.
Something systemic.
A power grid. And I mean, what we have to understand is that the shift is philosophical before it's physical. Yeah. It's about recognizing the limits of, let's say, charity versus the power of agency.
Precisely. The core difference is this move away from a system based on conditional humanitarian relief.
Which treats the symptom?
It treats the symptom, exactly. Yeah. And it moves toward one based on development as a systemic solution, and crucially, the provision of global public goods.
So the idea is that just alleviating immediate poverty, that's not enough.
It's not enough. China's current actions are rooted in the conviction that you have to build the foundational capacity for nations to lift themselves up permanently.
Yeah.
You create wealth, you don't just receive transfers.
That immediately changes the time horizon, doesn't it? I mean, traditional aid often works on immediate needs, maybe short-term institutional changes.
Right.
But building a port or a high-speed rail line, that's a multi-decade commitment. It's designed to fundamentally change a nation's entire economic geography.
It is. So to understand it, we have to look at the historical roots that made this unique approach, one based on non-interference and economic agency, the default position for China.
So let's start at the beginning then. Back in the early years of the PRC, because the history here is, well, it's surprisingly complicated.
It really is.
China wasn't just one thing globally. The sources describe this paradox, that it was operating as both a recipient and a donor of foreign assistance at the same time.
And that dual status is almost always overlooked when we analyze what's happening today, but it's so defining.
So how did that work in practice?
Well, look at the 1950s. The PRC started providing military and economic assistance almost right away to places like North Korea, North Vietnam.
Based on ideology and, I suppose, diplomatic necessity.
Of course. But at that exact same time, China was a major recipient of Soviet economic aid. It was relying heavily on their concessional loans for industrial equipment, technical guidance, all for its early industrialization.
So they were already learning what it felt like to be both the indebted party and the benefactor,
Sure.
all in the same moment.
Correct. And this dual experience, it didn't stop there. After 1978, with reform and opening up, China became a really significant recipient of Western development aid.
From places like the World Bank, right, and other Western governments.
Exactly. So China was using this capital and expertise, but at the same time, it remained a pretty substantial donor itself, particularly to Africa all through the 80s and 90s.
Which must have given them a unique kind of a 360-degree perspective on how aid, or maybe we should say development assistance, how it actually works on the ground.
For both sides, the giver and the receiver.
And critically, the sources are clear that this experience wasn't always positive, especially when China was the one seeking assistance from the West. This negative memory seems to be what cemented the foundation of their current non-interference policy.
That memory is perhaps the single most important piece of the puzzle. It's the foundation of non-interference. The historical accounts, they document explicit and implicit requests for U.S. economic assistance from Chinese communist leaders between 1945 and 1949.
This was before the PRC was even established.
Before. And the desire was fundamentally pragmatic. They needed capital and technical know-how to rebuild a completely shattered nation.
I remember reading about this. Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai reportedly approached the U.S. looking for capital, for technical cooperation.
They did.
Emphasizing that China desperately needed economic development and just didn't have the foundation to do it alone.
Yes. Mao even said in the late 40s that for the time being, they wouldn't pursue complete collectivization. He recognized the need for a long period of, quote, private enterprise, democratically regulated, just to spur development.
But the U.S. aid never came.
The ultimate refusal of U.S. aid, which became absolute after 1949 and was driven by political Cold War considerations, that was a truly formative experience. It instilled this lasting conviction that Western aid often came with political strings attached.
Strings designed to undermine their sovereignty or dictate internal policy.
Exactly.
That context makes the policy of non-interference much less of an abstract political principle. It's more of a hard-won commitment to sovereign equality.
It is. China's deep historical experience with conditional aid is what led you can draw a straight line, to the emphasis on non-conditionality in its own outreach to developing nations today.
So they refused to impose political systems or institutional reforms as, a prerequisite for getting an infrastructure investment.
This is the historical through line. That commitment is rooted directly in Zhou Enlai's 8 principles of 1964.
Okay, what were those?
The core principles are equality and mutual benefit, political non-interference, and supporting the recipient country's capacity for independent development. And that framework is still the core today.
So the idea is to extend China's own philosophy of, what's the term, Ziligangshin.
Ziligangshin, yes. It translates roughly to regeneration through one's own effort or self-reliance. The goal is to extend that principle to other developing countries. It's about creating the capacity for growth, not dependency.
So if the goal is self-reliance and the policy is non-interference, then development itself becomes the master key.
The master key.
And this brings us to that transition in philosophy, moving away from just political or ideological alignment to focusing really intensely on the practical well-being of the people, which in classical Chinese tradition is called minsheng.
Minsheng, right. The people's well-being. It was one of Sun Yat-sen's 3 principles, and it focuses specifically on economic and industrial development as the prerequisite for political independence and nationalism.
So the current approach sees things like industrial development and infrastructure as the master key to unlocking both sovereignty and prosperity for other nations.
The deep conviction is that political stability and a strong national voice, they flow directly from economic agency. And that infrastructure physical connectivity is the fastest way to get that agency.
And we have a perfect ground-level example of how this philosophy actually lands in reality. This takes it out of the abstract.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a thread on a Southeast Asian business forum recently that really stuck with me. It was shared by a coffee farmer in Laos. Her name was Phon Savan.
Okay.
She described how, for decades, her entire community was effectively landlocked. Getting her coffee beans to a port or even a major city market meant these arduous multi-day journeys over terrible roads.
So the logistics must have been crippling.
The cost of logistics, the time, the fuel, the spoilage, it ate up so much of her profit that it just kept her family, her neighbors, everyone locked in this cycle of subsistence farming. They were producing a valuable commodity, but couldn't affordably get it to the global market. But then she wrote about the opening of the China-Laos Railway, which now runs right through her region, and she referred to it using that exact phrase, the master key.
The master key.
Yeah. She detailed how the cost of moving a ton of coffee dropped by over 40%, almost instantly. In her words, the road and the rail didn't just bring Chinese goods in, they gave her community a way out to the world. They could finally participate in the regional economy.
That story it's just so illustrative of this whole philosophy. The focus is on providing tangible economic mechanisms, the hard connectivity that enable independent industrialization.
It's a huge distinction from approaches that might tie aid to institutional reforms.
Huge. And those reforms, while maybe necessary in the long run, they can take decades to show any real economic results. The Chinese model basically says, we will build the critical infrastructure first, and that hardware will give people like Fansavan the physical means to restructure their own economy and gain agency.
So for her, development isn't some abstract diplomatic concept. It's the physical reality of a modern, fast train that turned her landlocked village into a land-linked economic hub.
It gave her the economic agency she and her family never had before.
And the sheer scale of the investment data, it really backs up this focus on building structural capacity.
The numbers confirm it. If you look at the data from China's third white paper on foreign aid, which covers 2013 to 2018, you see this commitment in both the composition and the distribution of the assistance.
The numbers went up significantly.
Substantially. The average yearly aid during that period rose to $7 billion US. That's a significant commitment. It positions China as one of the world's major development financiers.
And the nature of the financing, it shows a commitment not just to charity, but to investment, to long-term structures, a mix of grants and loans.
Correct. During that period, grants, so non-repayable aid for more immediate humanitarian or social projects, they increased to nearly 50% of the total, 47.4% to be exact.
Okay, so that shows a dedication to social welfare.
It does. But then concessional loans accounted for 48.5%. And these loans are often tied to major infrastructure projects. They reflect that investment orientation, ensuring long-term returns through connectivity and enabling trade.
And the key takeaway here is the geographic focus.
The geographic focus, yes. Africa and Asia consistently receive over 80% of total Chinese aid. And this just highlights that foundational commitment to South-South cooperation, uniting nations with shared historical experiences as developing economies.
So it's this unique blend of history, the principle of non-interference, and the dedication to structural Minqing development.
All of that. It sets the foundation for their grand philosophical strategy, the global community of shared future.
Right. So if the historical experience dictates how China helps, through non-conditionality focusing on infrastructure, then the global community of shared future, the GCSF, that tells us why it helps.
That's the perfect way to frame it.
It's the philosophical blueprint for what China sees as a necessary new world order.
It is, and the concept of GCSF is introduced in the sources as a mandatory response to the fact that, humanity is at a crossroads. The fundamental idea is that in the 21st century, these converging global crises, they demand collective action.
No single nation can go it alone.
No single nation state, no matter how strong, can resolve these deep systemic challenges alone. Our fates are interconnected.
And the source material is very clear about identifying the critical deficits facing the world right now. It paints a pretty bleak picture of instability and uncertainty being the norm.
It's a sobering picture. We can break these challenges down into 4 major deficits that the GCSF is trying to address.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, there's the growing peace deficit. We're seeing war return to the Eurasian continent, tensions escalating in various flashpoints, and the shadow of the arms race is back, risking confrontation.
And then there's the second, and this one is maybe the most tangible, the development deficit.
This deficit is truly ballooning. It's made worse by a sluggish global economic recovery, the rise of unilateralism, protectionism.
The small yard, high fence approach to trade.
That's the one. And the consequence is devastating. The North-South gap has widened, and the Human Development Index has declined globally for the first time in 30 years.
30 years.
That's leaving over 800 million people struggling with severe hunger. Development has become grossly inequitable.
Okay, and the third deficit, security, that speaks directly to geopolitics.
This points to a new global strategic competition. a profound lack of mutual trust between major players, which has allowed the Cold War mindset to reemerge, promoting alliance-based confrontation.
The zero-sum game mentality.
Exactly. The idea that one nation's gain must, by definition, be another's loss.
And finally, there's the governance deficit.
This covers the systemic issues that our current international framework seems incapable of solving. The energy, food, and debt crises, the urgent need for climate governance, and the failure of existing global institutions, which we saw so clearly during the pandemic, to keep pace with modern challenges.
So the GCSF is presented as the big boat, essentially, a framework of cooperation required for all nations to weather these storms together.
It's a necessary pivot. And what's fascinating is how the GCSF vision explicitly rejects these obsolete models of international relations, particularly the ingrained Western assumption about rising powers.
You mean the idea that a rising power is destined to challenge the existing hegemon? The Thucydides trap?
The sources are very clear in rejecting this. They say there is no iron law that dictates a rising power will inevitably seek hegemony.
Where did that idea come from then, in their view?
They argue that idea is grounded in the memory of catastrophic wars between past hegemonic powers. It's typical cyclical hegemonic thinking. China's argument is that history shows hegemony ultimately leads to decline, and that China seeks development and revitalization through its own hard work and peaceful cooperation, not through invasion or subjugating others.
That stance is a direct philosophical challenge to the zero-sum logic that still dominates so much of global policy debate.
It is. If you reject the idea that a rising power must equal conflict, then you also have to reject the law of the jungle.
The winner-takes-all mindset.
Absolutely. The GCSF rejects that mindset, arguing that in a globally interconnected world, such thinking is just dangerously self-defeating. Instead, inclusive development for the benefit of all is championed as the only viable path.
So China explicitly aligns its national development with global development.
Yes, stating powerfully, when the world thrives, China thrives, and vice versa. The fundamental interests of the Chinese people are seen as being intrinsically aligned with the common interests of all peoples.
This is where it gets really interesting, because the GCSF isn't just a broad, abstract ideal. It actually outlines a specific world order with 5 defining characteristics.
The architecture.
Let's slow down and really appreciate this proposed architecture. Let's start with the first one, which deals with inclusion and interaction.
The first characteristic is openness and inclusiveness. This is a rejection of dividing the world into camps. It rejects drawing lines based on ideology, targeting specific countries, or forming exclusive blocks.
What's the analogy they use?
The analogy is that the ocean is vast because it admits all rivers. It advocates for democracy and international relations, meaning the future of the world is determined by all nations, the rules are written by all, and the fruits of development are shared by all.
And that concept of democracy and international relations, where the future isn't dictated by just a few major powers, that leads directly to the second characteristic,
which is equity and justice. This is the practical rejection of hegemonism. It emphasizes upholding international law and ensuring it's applied equally and uniformly across the globe, rejecting double standards.
So no country, no matter how big or powerful, has the right to dominate global affairs.
Or monopolize development advantages. Fairness in global governance is paramount.
Third, we have harmonious coexistence, which invokes a specific Chinese cultural value. How does that translate into a geopolitical goal?
It calls for seeking common ground while reserving differences. The analogy here is critical. Planet Earth must be seen as a stage for human coexistence, not an arena for wrestling between countries.
Diversity should be cherished as a strength.
Exactly. Allowing countries with wildly different histories, systems, and cultures to develop together in harmony, respecting each other's paths.
And that sense of respect ties right into the fourth point, diversity and mutual learning. This speaks to rejecting any assertion of cultural superiority.
This characteristic acknowledges that diverse civilizations are the basic feature of our world, and mutual learning is the core impetus for human progress. Countries must respect one another and pursue common development through exchange, avoiding any impulse to impose their own values or system on another society.
Okay, and finally, the fifth characteristic, unity and cooperation. This is the practical glue holding the whole vision together.
It is. It argues that pursuing development behind closed doors or engaging in protectionism leads only to stagnation and poverty. We have to replace the outdated winner-takes-all approach with a new vision of seeking win-win outcomes for all.
Which demands global partnerships based on dialogue.
Dialogue rather than confrontation, and partnership rather than exclusive alliances.
That is a deeply philosophical framework. And to really appreciate its weight, you can't talk about China's vision without connecting it back to its deep cultural roots. Where do these ideas really come from?
They're not modern foreign policy inventions at all. They have profound roots in traditional Chinese culture, which is why the vision resonates so strongly domestically. The core value underpinning GCSF is harmony.
Harmony within diversity.
Yes, the primacy of harmony, harmony within diversity, pursuing solidarity towards common progress. This links directly to the idea in classical Chinese philosophy that all nations together are one community.
And the pursuit of fairness and justice is a historic value that gets translated into a contemporary foreign policy principle.
Exactly. The historical principle that the strong should not bully the weak and the rich should not insult the poor. This cultural commitment to fairness informs the foreign policy goal of achieving a world of common good, or Jietong.
Jietong. What does that mean, precisely?
It's often understood as a utopian aspiration for a great unity or a great harmony, where there's peace, justice, and shared prosperity for all. It's different from Western models of multilateralism because it's fundamentally focused on a collective ethical obligation rather than just transactional national interest.
And it builds on more recent history, too.
It does. It inherits the fine diplomatic traditions of the PRC, specifically the 5 Principles of Peaceful Coexistence from the 1950s, and the commitment to an independent foreign policy of peace established after 1949.
So this cultural and historical heritage provides the deep philosophical context for the practical engine of the GCSF.
The Belt and Road Initiative.
Right. So if the GCSF is the blueprint for a shared future, then the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI, is the shovel and the cement.
That's a good way to put it.
It's the operational platform for translating that philosophy of non-interference, of economic self-reliance, into tangible global public goods. It connects the dots between China's massive industrial strength and the world's most pressing development needs.
The BRI is positioned not just as an investment scheme, but as a practical, vivid example of building the GCSF. It's a massive global public good and cooperation platform that China is providing to the world.
With a focus on high-quality cooperation.
Open, green, high-standard cooperation, fundamentally promoting sustainable development and improving people's lives through better connectivity.
And it's the focus on hard connectivity, the physical infrastructure, that really sets the BRI apart from traditional aid packages, which often focus on softer governance reforms or policy changes.
Hard connectivity is central. It's seen as the prerequisite for generating economic agency. We aren't talking about temporary infusions of cash or buying consumer goods. We're talking about long-term structures.
Railways, ports, communication lines, energy grids.
Things that enable nations to build their own independent industrial base. The goal is what economists might call endogenous growth. Growth generated from within the system itself.
And we have the perfect illustration of this idea of endogenous growth, or what the framework describes using a very powerful term, the hematopoietic function.
The blood-making function.
Exactly. I was browsing some behind-the-scenes footage from a logistics documentary recently, and I came across the story of a young man named Juma who works near the Mombasa-Nairobi Standard Gauge Railway in Kenya.
Okay.
And Juma talked about how, for his father's generation, the idea of aid was always about, bags of grain or temporary medical camps. Things that arrived, were consumed, and then they were gone. It was a transfusion.
That's a powerful analogy. Temporary aid is a transfusion. It helps immediately, but the body still needs external input to survive.
Exactly. But Juma's reality is different. He described the railway not as a gift or a transfusion, but as a circulatory system. This is exactly that hematopoietic function.
So by building the actual hardware of trade, the tracks, the smart ports, the container depots, the project isn't just delivering temporary relief.
No, it's enabling the local economy to create its own wealth, its own long-term capacity, or, as he put it, its own blood.
That analogy, the circulatory system with a hematopoietic function, is vital to understanding the core value proposition here. The railway lets goods move faster and cheaper, enables suppliers to be more reliable, reduces costs for manufacturers,
Facilitates tourism, new businesses.
all of it. The train arriving on time every single day is what allows local businesses to finally plan for a future they can control. It shifts the focus from reliance on external help to local self-generation of wealth.
That's economic sovereignty in action. And this emphasis on result-oriented state capacity is where China's unique industrial strength becomes a global asset. The sources repeatedly point out that the speed and scale of execution on these projects is often just astonishing.
The tangible results speak directly to this capacity for rapid, high-impact execution. I mean, consider the China-Laos Railway, which we mentioned earlier with Phonsavan's master key.
The scale of that is incredible.
It spans over 1,000 kilometers, but it's the technical detail that's impressive. 167 tunnels and 301 bridges through incredibly challenging mountains.
And it wasn't just the main line.
No. Beyond the technical achievement, the construction created more than 110,000 local jobs, and critically, it helped build about 2,000 kilometers of connecting roads and canals for villages all along the railway. It's an integrated approach that delivers visible, tangible benefits far beyond the main tracks.
Which fundamentally changes the economic map of the region. Laos goes from landlocked to landlinked.
And we see similar dramatic results transforming urban life in Southeast Asia.
The Jakarta-Bandung high-speed railway.
The first high-speed rail service in Southeast Asia. This wasn't just a marginal improvement. It cut the commute time between two major economic centers from over 3 hours down to just 40 minutes.
That's a life-changing difference for commuters and businesses.
It fundamentally improves daily life, logistics, and the ability of businesses to operate across the region. And for just a sheer demonstration of result-oriented state capacity, we have to talk about the Kamchik Tunnel in Uzbekistan.
The story of that tunnel is legendary, a showcase of sheer engineering focus.
Indeed. It's a critical component connecting eastern and western Uzbekistan, which were previously separated by difficult wilderness. The Kamchik Tunnel was completed by Chinese builders in just 900 days.
900 days. And the comparison?
The comparison often cited is that major European and American companies in the bidding process had offered construction periods of 5 years or more.
Wow.
Completing that project in less than 3 years rather than 5, it drastically accelerates economic integration and reduces reliance on volatile external transport links. That efficiency and speed are cornerstones of the BRI's appeal.
This whole endeavor, the GCSF and the BRI, it's ultimately pushing for a massive redefinition of globalization itself. It seems to be a reaction against the current system's failure to distribute wealth equitably.
The sources explicitly highlight that. They say the existing model of economic globalization has failed to adequately reflect the demands or represent the interests of developing countries.
Instead, it made the divide between rich and poor even worse.
Exactly. It allowed the law of the jungle and winner-takes-all mindsets to prevail, which led to the massive development deficits we talked about earlier.
So the push is to create a new type of economic globalization, one that's open, inclusive, balanced, and beneficial for all, explicitly opposing protectionism and fences and barriers.
Precisely. Promoting this new type of globalization means explicitly opposing unilateral sanctions, maximum pressure tactics, and the isolationist practice of alliance-based confrontation. The argument is that certain countries are retreating from globalization and closing themselves in small yards, high fences, which ultimately damages the collective global economy.
So it's not just about making the economic pie bigger.
It's also about, crucially, dividing it well so that development achievements benefit all countries more equitably. This is a fundamental challenge to the status quo.
It sounds like there's a strong warning embedded here about the geopolitical consequences of economic decoupling, the whole de-risking idea.
Absolutely. Attempts to de-synicize in the name of de-risking are framed as actively undermining opportunities and creating new risks for the global economy. In the GCSF view, non-cooperation is the biggest risk, and non-development is the biggest threat to security.
So the BRI, by contrast, is presented as an open and inclusive process.
One that seeks common development for all participants, rather than forming exclusive cliques or what opponents might dismiss as a China club.
Okay, so the GCSF is the grand vision, and the BRI is the hardware to execute it. But how does China ensure this vision is comprehensive, that it addresses all facets of human need from security to culture?
That's where we lit at the strategic framework of the 3 integrated global initiatives: development, security, and civilization.
The GDI, GSI, and GCI.
Right. They're presented as mutually supporting and interdependent elements of the GCSF. Development is the material foundation for security and civilization. Security is the fundamental prerequisite for both, and civilization provides the cultural and ethical support. They're meant to offer comprehensive solutions.
Let's start with the material foundation. The Global Development Initiative, GDI. What are its core goals, and how does China support them tangibly?
The GDI's fundamental aim is to accelerate the implementation of the UN's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It maintains that development should be people-centered and aims for united, equal, balanced, and inclusive global development partnerships.
And it's not just about external projects, right? China's own internal growth is part of this.
It is. The modernization of 1.4 billion people creates a market that will eventually rival the aggregated size of all developed countries. That opens up vast trade and investment opportunities for everyone.
But beyond its own market growth, what are the specific actionable supports being provided to other developing nations under the GDI?
Well, as the largest developing country and a member of the Global South, China is committed to win-win cooperation. It executes what are termed small but beautiful projects.
Small but beautiful, what does that mean?
It's an important distinction. These are results-oriented actions focusing on immediate practical benefits. They often fill gaps overlooked by larger, more bureaucratic programs. These GDI projects, executed in nearly 60 countries across areas like poverty reduction, food security, climate response, have directly benefited over 30 million individuals through quick impact results.
And a crucial point that ties back to those principles of non-interference and fairness is China's stance on global debt, which is a huge concern for the Global South.
China has played a leading and significant role in global debt alleviation. It has contributed more than any other G20 member to the implementation of the Debt Service Suspension Initiative, the DSSI.
And that was designed to help the poorest nations manage financial distress during crises.
It was. Furthermore, China has reached specific agreements on suspending debt repayments with 19 African countries, helping that continent alleviate significant debt pressure. This reinforces that commitment to common development and avoiding making the North-South gap even worse.
Okay, so next we move to the fundamental prerequisite. B, the Global Security Initiative, GSI. This one focuses directly on the growing security deficit and rejecting that Cold War mentality.
The GSI's core goal is fostering a new vision of common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security. The underlying principle is realism. No country can maintain absolute security on its own.
And trying to build your own security by destabilizing others is ultimately counterproductive.
It is. The law of the jungle is explicitly rejected here as a foundation for international peace.
This philosophy actively promotes moving diplomacy away from power politics and toward dialogue. And the most high-profile example of this in action recently was, surprisingly, in the Middle East.
The historic reconciliation between regional rivals Saudi Arabia and Iran, achieved through China's mediation.
That was a critical diplomatic success. It showed a power outside the traditional Western axis could facilitate de-escalation between long-standing adversaries.
It set a powerful example for how countries in volatile regions can resolve disputes and achieve good neighborly relations through dialogue rather than confrontation. It really catalyzed a wider wave of reconciliation across the Middle East.
But the GSI isn't just about high-level geopolitics. It's also about providing stable, practical public goods for collective survival. And that brings us to a compelling personal experience I tracked recently from Central Asia.
Oh.
It was a digital dispatch from a remote mountainous region in Central Asia where a new energy grid was being integrated. There was an engineer named Alisher who spent years dealing with sporadic, crippling, rolling blackouts that paralyzed his town every winter.
That sounds brutal. Essential services freezing up.
Exactly. And he spoke about working alongside Chinese technicians to install high-voltage equipment that finally stabilized the local grid. What struck me most was his description of shared prosperity as a form of collective survival.
Collective survival?
Yeah. We often frame these infrastructure projects purely through a lens of strategic competition. But through Alisher's eyes, the perspective is so much more immediate and pragmatic. He sees the stable power supply as an essential public good in a time of global volatility.
That is the practical application of GSI. It's a robust action to help developing countries tackle these non-traditional security challenges, because energy stability is a core element of collective survival.
When Alisher flips a switch in a blizzard and the lights stay on, the shared future becomes a simple, profound reality of reliability.
Exactly. And China is actively cooperating in other non-traditional domains like biosecurity and food security, proposing the International Cooperation Initiative on Global Food Security within the G20, for instance, all aimed at providing collective stability.
Finally, we have to look at the cultural and ethical support system. C, the Global Civilization Initiative, GCI. What is this initiative trying to achieve in a world so rife with ideological competition?
The GCI is designed to address the cultural and governance deficits by advocating for mutual respect and learning. Its core goals are advocating respect for the diversity of civilizations and promoting the common values of humanity.
And those common values are explicitly defined as
Peace, development, equity, justice, democracy, and freedom.
the most striking element here is the outright rejection of any kind of cultural or civilizational superiority, the idea of imposing one system on another.
Precisely. It rejects the idea that one civilization is superior to another, emphasizing the importance of respecting the right of all countries to independently choose their development paths and political systems based on their own specific national conditions.
This is where that famous analogy comes in.
The one that says, democracy is not Coca-Cola, tasting the same across the world as the syrup is produced in one single country. Democracy is meant to be a locally tailored solution to real problems, not an ornament to be imposed from the outside.
So promoting common values like justice and freedom isn't about imposing a single standardized model. It's about finding fundamental common ground while respecting systemic differences.
It's about harmony without uniformity. The GCI asserts that attempts to arbitrarily define the standards of democracy or civilization to provoke ideological confrontation are viewed as promoting fake democracy and undermining global peace.
And to make this commitment to mutual learning practical, the GCI promotes extensive, actionable exchanges. What do those look like?
They include continuous cultural diplomacy efforts like the popular Happy Spring Festival events that have been held globally for over 20 years, the establishment of cultural alliances under the Belt and Road Initiative, and the launch of the Ni Hao China inbound tourism promotion program, designed to welcome external visitors and foster understanding.
It's all about removing barriers to cultural exchange,
Deepening mutual understanding and facilitating the common progress of human civilization by celebrating diversity, not trying to standardize it.
So these three initiatives, the GDI, GSI, and GCI, they're what give structure to the philosophical ambition of the GCSF, using the practical power and execution capacity of the BRI.
They ensure the GCSF is dynamic, open, and inclusive. It allows countries of vastly different backgrounds and economic stages to seek common ground and reinforce cooperation for win-win outcomes. It creates a framework where development, security, and culture are seen as interconnected necessities for collective progress.
This has been a monumental deep dive. We followed a trajectory from a history professor's desk holding a faded photo of Dr. Norman Bethune all the way to a high-speed rail line in Southeast Asia and a stable power grid in Central Asia.
We've really tracked the evolution of China's internationalism, moving from that historical memory of needing a gift, the scalpel of desperation, to the proactive, large-scale provision of a complex, self-sustaining system.
The power grids, railways, and ports that enable independent economic sovereignty and that hematopoietic growth we talked about. The ultimate takeaway here seems to be that the global community of shared future is a bold, long-term endeavor. It's rooted so deeply in China's unique historical experience, both as a recipient and a donor, and in its modernization ideology that prioritizes Minxin development as the master key.
It's a strategy focused on proving that a cooperative, win-win international structure, one based rigorously on the principles of non-interference, sovereign equality, and infrastructural enablement, is the necessary and practical path for collective survival and shared prosperity in the volatile 21st century. It's a vision that aims to seamlessly integrate national self-interest with the common well-being of the entire world.